The demand came at dawn, delivered by 3 armed outriders who rode through the canyon gates of Redwall Settlement before the cook fires were properly lit, their horses kicking red dust into the pale morning air, their message written in the clipped language of treaty obligation. The Earthshaker Chieftess would arrive within the week, and the settlement was to provide a suitable escort, a residence, and 1 qualified physician to attend her needs during the summit negotiations. Samuel Maddox read the parchment twice, standing in the doorway of his apothecary with a half-ground measure of willow bark in his left hand, and a growing sense that his quiet life had just taken a very sharp turn. He was 31 years old, lean from the canyon's hard living, with calloused hands and a steady gaze that patients always said made them feel more confident than they actually had reason to be. He had served as a field surgeon for 3 years during the border wars, had stitched wounds in mud and firelight, and had come to Redwall afterward, because it was as far from those memories as a man could get while still staying inside the known territories. He had built his practice here among the red cliffs, among the salt traders and canyon miners, and the scrappy independent families who had carved homes into the sandstone. He had not planned on political entanglements. He had not planned on orcs, but Redwall's appointed governor, a man named Carveth who wore his authority like an ill-fitting coat, appeared at Samuel's door within the hour looking harassed. "You're the only physician in the settlement," Carveth said without preamble. "I'm aware," Samuel said. "The treaty requires we provide medical attendance for the Chieftess. It's a courtesy gesture. Show we're not planning to poison the negotiations before they start." "Or actually poison her," Samuel said dryly. Carveth's expression flickered with something uncomfortable. "She's bringing 4 warriors as personal guard. They'll be watching everything. Her clan, the Stoneback, they have a grievance 3 generations deep with the lowland settlements. This summit is meant to end it. The mining consortiums want access to the upper canyon passes the Stoneback's control. The Stonebacks want the raids on their summer pastures to stop." He paused. "It's complicated." "It always is," Samuel said. He set the willow bark down. "I'll do it." Carveth looked mildly surprised, as if he had expected more resistance. "You'll attend her without complaint. She's a person who may need medical attention during a difficult negotiation. That's my job." Samuel folded the parchment and slid it into the pocket of his work apron. "But I want written guarantee that I answer to her welfare, not to the summit's political convenience. If I say she needs rest, the negotiations pause. If I say she needs treatment, the room clears. Those are my terms." Carveth opened his mouth, thought about the 4 Stoneback warriors, and closed it again. "Fine." She arrived 5 days later. Samuel was at the canyon's upper gate when the Stoneback party rode in because it was his job to be there, and because despite himself he was curious. He had treated orc patients before, traveling traders mostly, once a wounded warrior who had been too far from his clan's healers to reach safety. He knew their physiology was not so different from a human's once you got past the surface of it, the greater density of muscle, the slightly different blood chemistry, the tusks that complicated any work near the jaw. He knew it academically. What he was not entirely prepared for was Morag Earthshaker. She rode at the head of her party on a gray horse that looked like it was doing its best to live up to the honor, and she was not what the stories made of orc chieftesses, all raw mass and war paint. She was tall, certainly, and broad in the shoulder, with the kind of muscled build that came from a lifetime of real physical work and fighting, but she carried it with an ease that bordered on grace. Her skin was the deep, warm green of late summer moss, and her dark hair was pulled back from her face in a series of tight, practical braids that nonetheless had a deliberate beauty to them, the kind of arrangement that took time and care. She was perhaps 28, not much younger than him, and her face was striking in a way that made striking feel like an inadequate word. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it could be hard or generous depending on the moment, and dark eyes that were currently making a swift, unsentimental inventory of everything in Redwall's canyon approach and finding most of it wanting. She wore fitted warrior's leathers in dark burgundy and brown, A close-cut bodice with bronze ring lacing up the front that emphasized the lines of her figure, matching trousers tucked into knee-high boots, and a short cloak thrown back over one shoulder. At her hip was a heavy curved blade she had not bothered to piece-bind, which was either an oversight or a statement, and given the directness of her gaze, Samuel suspected the latter. Across the back of the cloak and the shoulders of the bodice, embroidered in thread so dark it barely caught the light, were the geometric patterns of Stoneback clan markings. She wore them like a second skin. She spotted Samuel almost immediately, which surprised him, because he was standing to the side and slightly behind Governor Carveth's welcoming party. Her eyes cut to him with a precision that suggested she already knew exactly who everyone in the group was and what role they served, and she held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable before looking away to address the governor. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and measured, with an accent that made the common tongue sound like it had weight to it. "Governor, I trust the residence is ready. Chieftess Earthshaker, we are honored. I assume you are." "The residence?" Carveth blinked. "Yes. The Red House, which is our finest, and the physician." There was a fractional pause, and then Carveth gestured toward Samuel with what might generously be called grace. "Master Maddox. He is our settlement's senior apothecary and surgeon." Morag's gaze returned to Samuel. He met it without flinching, which he suspected was the only correct response. "You're the one who wrote the terms," she said. It was not a question. Samuel felt a flicker of surprise. Carveth had shared his conditions with her party ahead of arrival, apparently. "I wrote the terms for my professional conduct, yes. That your medical judgment takes precedence over summit scheduling. Yes." Something moved in her expression that he could not entirely read. "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." She turned her horse toward the Red House without waiting for the governor's escort, which required the governor's escort to scramble to catch up, and the 4 Stoneback warriors fell in around her with the practiced ease of people who had done exactly this before. Samuel watched her go and thought that, whatever the next weeks were going to be, they were not going to be quiet. The Red House was the best accommodation Redwall had, which meant it had windows that actually closed properly, and a hearth large enough to heat 2 rooms at once. Samuel arrived that evening to conduct an initial health assessment, which was both a genuine medical courtesy and, he suspected, an opportunity for Morag to take his measure in a more controlled setting than the arrival gate had provided. She was alone in the main room, her 4 warriors posted outside. Her short cloak hung on the back of a chair. The lamp on the table was the good kind, with a clean burning wick, and in its light she looked more vivid rather than less, the bronze lacing on her bodice catching the glow. She was reviewing documents when he knocked and entered, and she looked up with the same direct assessment she had given him at the gate. "Sit," she said. "I usually stand during examinations," he said, "but it's your call." Her mouth curved slightly. "Then stand." She set the documents down. "What do you need from me?" "General health, any ongoing conditions, injuries, sensitivities to compounds I might use. It's standard." "I was shot with a crossbow bolt 3 months ago," she said matter-of-factly, pulling the lacing of her bodice partially loose on the right side to expose the shoulder beneath. The scar was recent, still pink, sealed clean. "Your predecessor's work, I am told. A healer out of Thornwall. It healed well but pulls when I raise the arm above my head." Samuel set his kit on the table and stepped forward, and to his credit, he remained entirely professional as he examined the scar, pressing gently along the line of it to check for adhesion of the underlying tissue, watching the tension in her expression for indication of pain. She was remarkably still under his hands. Most patients moved without knowing they were moving. "There's some scar tissue binding to the deltoid," he said. "I can show you a series of movements that will break it down over time. It's not serious, but if you leave it, you'll lose range in that arm permanently." "Show me." He guided her arm through the motion sequence, his hand at her elbow and then at her wrist, and the closeness of it was something he filed away in the professional column of his mind, with the deliberate effort of a man who knew the value of clear professional lines. She was warm and solid, and she smelled of horses and something dry and herbal that he thought was a clan remedy of some kind. Her eyes tracked his movements with careful attention. "Every morning," he said, stepping back. "Before anything else. It will be sore for the first week. I am familiar with soreness." She relaced her bodice with swift, practiced fingers. "Why did you agree to attend me?" "Because it's my job." Other physicians in Redwall could have been pressured into it. The governor did not strike me as a man who takes no for an answer. He isn't, but I set terms he had to agree to before I said yes. Your terms protect me from being pushed past my limits for political convenience. They protect any patient I'm responsible for, Samuel said. That's not specific to you. Morag studied him for a long moment. You are either principled or very good at appearing so. I'm too tired for performance, he said. I've stitched too many men in the dark to have much interest in pretending. Something shifted in her expression, a faint softening he wasn't sure she was aware of. The border wars, she said. You have the hands for it, field surgeon, 3 years. My brother died in the border wars, 3rd engagement, Copper River. Samuel went still. I'm sorry. He was 22. She picked up her documents again. That is not a rebuke. I say it so you understand that I know what those years cost on both sides. I know what they cost, he said quietly. Then we understand each other again. She glanced up. Same time tomorrow. He recognized a dismissal when he heard one. He collected his kit and went, and at the door he paused and turned back. The morning exercises for your shoulder. Start them tomorrow. Don't skip them because the negotiations heat up. I will not. Good night, Chieftess. Maddox, she said, and it sounded different from how the governor said it. Lower, more deliberate. Good night. The summit was supposed to last a week. Within 3 days, Samuel understood why it would last considerably longer. The canyon settlement of Redwall sat at the intersection of 3 competing interests. The mining consortiums who wanted to push extraction operations up into the Stoneback-held passes, the independent settlers who wanted the raiding on their eastern farms to stop and genuinely did not care who made that happen, and the governing council who wanted credit for the peace without paying its actual price. Morag Earthshaker had come to this summit representing the Stoneback Orc clans, a confederacy of 7 subclans spread across the Upper Canyon territories, and she had come alone in the sense that no elder or war chief had come with her. She represented them by authority that was hers entirely, which meant everything she agreed to, she owned, and everything she refused, she defended with the full weight of her position. Samuel began to understand the precision of her thinking in the intervals between negotiations, when she would return to the Red House, and he would be there, either for her shoulder work or to answer the various minor medical demands of a woman whose body was under considerable stress. She slept less than she should have. She ate sparingly and with discipline. She carried the negotiations in her head the way he carried surgical procedures, every step mapped and sequenced. On the 4th evening, she came back from a session that had clearly gone badly and sat in the chair by the hearth with the particular stillness of someone containing something large. This, Samuel said, setting a cup on the table beside her. It's not medicinal. Well, it's slightly medicinal. It will help you sleep. She looked at the cup. What is in it? Chamomile, some passion flower, a small amount of valerian, less than I'd give someone in real distress, more than plain tea. She picked it up and drank half of it in a single pull, which was not quite what he had intended, but her expression smoothed slightly. They will not concede on the eastern boundary, she said. The mining consortium wants the full breadth of the Redstone Pass. I cannot give them that. It is 3 clans winter grazing. Do they know it's winter grazing? They know. They believe compensatory payment is an adequate substitute for a place that has belonged to the Stoneback for 4 generations. Samuel pulled the other chair out from the table and sat down, which was something he had not done before in these evening sessions. She noticed but did not comment on it. Is there a middle position? He asked. There is always a middle position, she said. The question is who has to lose more to get there. She finished the tea and set the cup down. You asked me a question 4 days ago when I asked why you took this position. I remember. You said you were too tired for performance. She looked at him directly. Why are you really still here at this hour? The other physicians in this settlement go home after their rounds. I told you, you're not sleeping enough. Stress degrades healing. That is not the only reason. No, he admitted. I find the work interesting. The medicine, the negotiation. Watching someone hold that much complexity and not crack under it, he paused. I have a lot of respect for what you're trying to do here. Morag was quiet for a moment. The fire popped and settled. Most of the humans in this room across the table from me believe I am a figurehead, that there are male war chiefs behind me pulling the arrangement. There aren't, Samuel said. How do you know? Because every decision you've made in the last 4 days has been yours. You don't check with anyone, you don't defer. And when the consortium representative tried to redirect past you to your senior warrior, you cut him off so smoothly he didn't realize he'd been stopped. Samuel shook his head slightly. You're not a figurehead, you're the sharpest person at that table. Morag's expression did something complicated and briefly unguarded. You have been watching closely. I am a physician, he said. I watch people for a living. Yes, she said, but not quite like that. The charged silence between them had weight and warmth, and Samuel felt it the way he had felt few things since the war, solidly, with his whole attention. He stood up before it could become something neither of them had planned for in a setting this complicated. Sleep, he said. The Valyrian will start working soon. Do your shoulder work first. Maddox. She said his name the way she always did, as if it were a sentence in itself. Thank you. Get some rest, Chieftess. He walked back through the canyon under the late stars and thought about the color of firelight on dark green skin and the way she had looked at him as if she were deciding something. The crisis arrived on the 9th day. Samuel was at his apothecary when one of Morag's warriors, a scarred, compact woman named Drek, appeared in the doorway with the particular economy of movement that meant urgency being held under tight control. The Chieftess requires your attendance, Drek said. What's happened? The summit was interrupted this morning. There was a confrontation in the East Market. One of our party was attacked. Samuel grabbed his kit before Drek finished the sentence. He was across the canyon and through the red house door in under 6 minutes, and the scene he walked into was controlled but tense. Morag standing in the center of the room, still wearing her full negotiation appearance, her jaw set, and at the table, one of her younger warriors, a male of perhaps 20 with a gash along his forearm that had bled considerably into a wrapped cloth. The cloth off, Samuel said, crossing to the warrior immediately. What happened? A disagreement, Morag said, her voice flat and very steady. In the market, a consortium man's hired enforcer took exception to Rock's presence. Rock bore the examination without complaint, which Samuel respected, and the wound was significant, a deep cut that had nicked something it should not have, but clean-edged, which was good news. Samuel worked quickly and in focused silence, cleaning, checking the depth, beginning the stitching with practiced economy. How bad? Morag asked from slightly behind him. He'll keep the arm, Samuel said. It's going to hurt for 2 weeks, and he's not to lift anything heavier than a cup until I say otherwise, but it's clean and I've caught the worst of the bleeding. He glanced back at her. You're not injured. No. Sit down anyway. She sat, which he noted, because she was not the kind of person who followed instructions reflexively. She was sitting because something had shaken her, and the sitting was deliberate self-management. He finished with Rock, gave him clear instructions that Drek translated into the Stoneback dialect for certainty, and then came to stand in front of Morag. Let me look at you, he said. I told you, your shoulder, Morag. He said her name without the title for the first time, and it landed between them with a small, precise weight. He had not planned it. She went still. You were in a physical confrontation. I need to check the shoulder. A beat, and then she offered her right side to him without further argument. He checked the shoulder, which had held, the scar tissue not retorn, but the muscles around it were hard with tension, and she was carrying her arm slightly differently than she had been. You're guarding it, he said. Consciously or not, it's going to tighten up if you don't, I know. She exhaled slowly. I know. He did not step back immediately. What are they going to do about the attack? Nothing, she said. Legally nothing. The enforcer will claim provocation. Rock will be blamed for being in the market at all. Her voice had gone very quiet and very controlled. This is how it works. This has always been how it works. You knew it would be like this when you came. Knowing it does not make it less enraging. She looked up at him, and there was something raw and genuine in her expression that she usually kept behind the negotiator's composure. I came here to end 3 generations of this. I am trying to build something that lasts, and they send an enforcer to cut one of my people in a public market to remind me that they can. Samuel crouched down until he was at eye level with her, which put him in the unusual position of looking up slightly into a face that was usually looking down at his. "Then we go back to the table tomorrow," he said. "And you take that anger and you make it the sharpest thing in the room." Something ignited in her expression. Not gratitude exactly, more like recognition. "You are not like the others here," she said. "I've been told I'm inconveniently principled. That is not what I mean." Her voice had dropped to something quieter and more deliberate. "You see me, not the Chieftess, not the orc at the summit, me." Samuel held her gaze and felt the truth of it settle over him like something he had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. "Yes," he said, "I do." She reached out and put her hand over his, where it rested on the arm of her chair, and it was a deliberate gesture, unhurried and exact. Her hand was larger than his, warm, strong in the bones. "Then you understand," she said, "why that matters." He turned his hand under hers and held it. "I understand." They stayed like that for a moment, neither of them moving, the fire settling behind them, and then Morag withdrew her hand with the same deliberate care she had offered it and stood up and was the Chieftess again. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. He left with the particular ache of a man who has touched something extraordinary and chosen to set it down carefully rather than grip it too hard, too soon. The Eastern market attack became the crack that let the larger problem pour through. Over the following 4 days, the tensions in Redwall cracked along lines Samuel had been watching develop since Morag's arrival. A faction of canyon settlers who had no allegiance to the mining consortium, but who had real and unhealed grudges from border war raids, had been organizing quietly against the summit itself. They did not want peace. Or rather, they did not want the specific peace that required acknowledging orc territorial sovereignty over the upper canyon passes. Their spokesman was a man named Aldrich Crane, who had lost a homestead in a Stoneback raid 12 years ago, and who wore that grief like a brand he offered to everyone he met. Samuel was aware of Crane's faction in the way he was aware of most things in Redwall, through his patients, who told him things they would not tell the governor because the apothecary's room was a confessional of sorts in any small community. He did not interfere in politics. It was not his role, but he kept what he heard and he watched. On the 14th evening of the summit, Morag came to his apothecary for the first time, rather than him going to her. She knocked at the back door, which was the entrance his regular patients used to avoid the social complexity of the front, and she was alone, without her warriors, which was unusual enough that Samuel felt the back of his neck prickle with alertness. "Come in," he said, holding the door open. "Are you hurt?" "No." She stepped inside, ducking slightly for the low frame, and looked around his working space with the same swift inventory she applied to everything. Shelves of labeled bottles, bundles of dried herbs, the long work table with its clean cloth, the smell of camphor and dried lavender, and something sharp and herbal he was currently grinding. "I needed to speak to someone outside the Red House." "You think you're being listened to." "I know I am being listened to." She settled herself on the edge of the work table, which was sturdy enough for it, and folded her hands in her lap. "There is a faction working to end the summit through other means than negotiation. Crane's group." She looked at him. "You know." "I hear things," he said. "I'm not a political operative, but I hear things. They intend to present evidence to the summit that my clan has been continuing raids on eastern settlements even after our agreement to halt offensive movement during talks." She kept her voice level. "The evidence is fabricated." There have been no Stoneback raids in 4 months, but the document is convincing enough to be weaponized. And if they present it, the summit collapses. My authority is questioned. I return to the upper passes with nothing and the raids resume because the eastern farmers keep their grudge and the consortium keeps its pressure on the passes and both sides feed the fire. She looked at him directly. 3 generations more of what my brother died in. Samuel sat down on the stool by his work table. What do you need from me? I need to know if there is anyone in this settlement with legal standing to challenge fabricated evidence in a formal council session. There's a settlement charter, he said. Redwall has a council, 5 seats. 3 are pro-consortium right now, but 2 are independent. If you could get a formal challenge entered before Crane's faction presents their document, it forces a public evidentiary session rather than a closed council review. He thought about it. The independent seats are held by a woman named Ferris, who runs the Salt Traders Cooperative, and a man named Brecht, who's the canyon's head surveyor. Neither of them owes the consortium anything. And you, she studied him, do you have standing in this council? I'm a charter citizen. I can bring a petition. He felt the weight of what he was considering. I'm not a legal advocate, Morag. I'm an apothecary who is very aware of his limits. You know this settlement better than anyone who has not spent 30 years in it, she said, and you are not afraid of them. I'm not afraid of them, he confirmed. But I need to be honest with you. If I do this, it puts me at odds with half the settlement's power structure. The consortium has significant influence here. My practice survives on my reputation and my relationships. Morag met his eyes and said nothing for a moment, and then, if you are not willing, I understand. I do not ask you to sacrifice more than you can afford. The fact that she said it without pressure, without manipulation, with the clean directness of someone who meant exactly what they said and nothing else, settled something in Samuel that had been weighing its options. I didn't say I wasn't willing, he said. I said I needed to be honest about the cost. He stood up. I'm going to need to see the document they plan to present. Can you get it? I have a copy, she said. I have had people watching this faction since the 4th day of talks. Of course you have, he almost smiled. Bring it tomorrow morning, early before the session opens. She stood from the work table, and the lamp light was very warm and the room was very small and she was very close. Samuel, she said, and it was the first time she had used his given name. It landed in him like a stone in still water, rings spreading outward. Why are you willing to do this? He looked up at her, because she had the height on him and always would, and that thought did not trouble him in the slightest. Because you came here to end something worth ending, he said. And because I am very tired of watching good things fail. Because nobody was willing to say the obvious true thing out loud in a room full of people who preferred comfortable lies. Morag looked at him for a long moment, and then she did what he had not expected. She put her hands on either side of his face, warm and careful, and kissed him with the same deliberate, unhurried exactness that characterized everything she did. It was not tentative or experimental. It was decided. It was her telling him, in a language older than negotiation, that she had made up her mind. He kissed her back with equal clarity, his hands coming up to rest at her waist, and the world outside the small apothecary, and its lamplight was completely irrelevant for a sustained and warm and significant moment. When she drew back, she did not step away immediately. Her forehead touched his briefly, and then she straightened. Tomorrow morning, she said. Her voice was a fraction lower and a fraction warmer than it had been. Early. I'll be here, he said. She went out through the back door, and Samuel stood in his apothecary and looked at the lamp on the work table and felt, for the first time in a long time, like the world was exactly the size it needed to be. The document was a forgery, and Samuel knew it the moment he read it, not because he was a legal expert, but because he was a careful reader, and the document made a geographical error that anyone who had spent significant time in the Upper Canyon passes would catch immediately. The alleged raid it described had occurred at a place called Redstone Fork, which the document located on the north side of the canyon watershed. Redstone Fork was on the south side. A minor error to someone unfamiliar with the terrain. Absolute proof of fabrication to someone who was not. Who would know this area well enough to confirm the discrepancy? Morag asked, sitting across from him at his work table in the gray pre-dawn light. Brecht, Samuel said immediately. The head surveyor. He has mapped every pass in this canyon system for the last 20 years. He could testify to the error in 10 seconds, and nobody in that council room could argue with his surveys. Will he? He will if I ask him before the session opens and he understands what's at stake. Samuel folded the document carefully. The strategy has to be timed right. If Crane's faction presents this to the council first, it will be entered into the formal record and the rebuttal becomes a longer fight. We need to enter the challenge before they present. How do you do that? A citizen's petition for prior review of any summit-related evidence before council admission. It's in the charter. It was put there after a land dispute 30 years ago where fraudulent documents were used to strip a family of their claim. It's rarely invoked, but it's there. He looked at her. It gives us the right to demand the document be publicly read and questioned before it's formally admitted. Morag's eyes were very steady and very bright. You are remarkably well informed for an apothecary. I've stitched Brecht's knee 3 times. He talks while I work. Something in her expression caught and warmed. Then let us go speak to the surveyor. They went together through Redwall's morning streets in the Red Rock Canyon light, and people noticed them because it was a small settlement, and the Chieftess was not a person who went unnoticed, and the physician walking beside her at the same pace was not either. Samuel felt the eyes of it and met none of them, his attention on the morning ahead. Morag walked at his side with her spine straight and her chin level and her dark eyes forward, and the Stoneback markings on her shoulders caught the early light. Brecht was a stout, gray-bearded man who opened his door, looked at them and said, "I wondered when this was going to land on my porch." He let them in. He confirmed the geographical error in under 2 minutes, pulling his own surveys from a flat cabinet and laying them out on his drafting table with the calm authority of a man who has spent a career in the certainty of measured fact. Redstone Fork is south-facing, south of the main watershed divide, has been since I first mapped it in my 30s. Anyone who says otherwise is either ignorant or lying. Will you say that in council session today? Samuel asked. Brecht looked at him, then at Morag, then at the document. You're asking me to contradict a document that the consortium faction brought to this summit. I'm asking you to tell the truth in your professional capacity, Samuel said, which is all you've ever done. Brecht was quiet for a moment. Faris, the salt traders' cooperative chair, was apparently already notified, because she appeared at Brecht's back door 40 minutes later and added her voice to his without much persuasion required. She had 4 children who traded along the eastern routes, and she had wanted peace for 20 years. They arrived at the council hall before the formal session opened, and Samuel filed the citizen's petition for prior review with the council clerk, while Morag waited in the hall's outer courtyard, which she had not been obligated to wait in but which she had chosen, on Samuel's quiet counsel, to make a public statement of her willingness to submit to the process. It was a piece of political theater, but it was genuine in the way all her gestures were genuine. She was not afraid of what examination would reveal, and she wanted everyone watching to know it. Crane's faction arrived to a session that had already been reorganized. What happened over the following 2 hours was the kind of thing that small settlements talk about for decades. Governor Carveth, who had not anticipated any of this, and was therefore genuinely surprised rather than performing surprise, opened the prior review procedure with the rigid dignity of a man trying to appear in control of something that had already moved past him. Crane's document was read aloud into the public session, which drew gasps from the settler faction, vindicated nods from the anti-summit crowd, and a cold, motionless attention from Morag Earthshaker, who stood at the center of the hall's floor with her hands at her sides and her eyes fixed on the reader. And then Brecht stood up. He was not a dramatic man. He did not raise his voice. He laid his surveys on the council table in the unhurried way of a craftsman who has nothing to prove because the work proves itself, and he pointed to Redstone Fork, and he said, in his dry surveyor's voice, "That location is on the south watershed. The document claims north. Those are not the same place. They are, in fact, approximately 4 miles apart, and any member of this council who would like to dispute my measurements is welcome to come with me to the canyon and see for themselves." The room went very still. Then Ferris stood and invoked the settler cooperative's accumulated survey records as corroborating documentation, and named Crane's faction's primary document author, who turned out to have arrived in Redwall 8 months ago, conveniently close to the summit's announcement, and had no prior claim to canyon residency. The consortium representative made 2 attempts to reframe the conversation and was cut off both times by Ferris, who had been attending council sessions for 15 years and knew procedural rules the way Samuel knew anatomy. Carveth, calculating rapidly, sided with the evidentiary finding, because Carveth was not a moral man but he was a practical one, and the direction of the room was clear. Crane stood up and pointed at Samuel across the floor of the hall, his face red and his voice shaking with genuine outrage. "This is the work of a man who has forgotten which side he is on," he said. "A human physician advocating for an orc faction against his own settlement's interests." "I am advocating for the truth of a geographical record," Samuel said from where he stood beside Brecht. His voice was calm. "And for the terms of a summit that this settlement entered into voluntarily. Which side is that exactly?" Crane turned to the room. "Look at him, standing beside her, doing her work for her. Does no one else see what this is?" Morag moved. She crossed the floor of the council hall in 5 long strides, and placed herself between Samuel and Crane with the absolute physical authority of a woman who had commanded warriors in the field. And the room went not just quiet but motionless, because there was something in the quality of her presence in that moment that made noise feel like a bad idea. "He is not doing my work for me," she said, her voice carrying cleanly to every corner of the room. "He is doing what a man of principle does when he sees something wrong. He names it. If that threatens you, the question you should be asking is not about his loyalties. It is about yours." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "The Stoneback came to this summit to build peace. I personally, on behalf of 7 clans who have fought and bled and lost as much as anyone in this room, we came to talk. You sent an enforcer to cut one of my people in your market. You fabricated a document to destroy negotiations that could stop the next 20 years of dying." She swept the room with her gaze. "If that is how Redwall treats those who come in good faith, then perhaps the real question at this summit is whether Redwall deserves a peace it was not willing to earn." The silence that followed was the kind that had texture. Governor Carveth stood and called for a formal session recess in a voice that barely concealed relief, and the council voted to void Crane's document from the record, 3-2, with Carveth as the deciding voice. Crane left without speaking again. Samuel was aware, in the aftermath, of Morag standing near the council room's main doors, and being approached by the independent council members, by Ferris and Brecht, by a scattering of settlers who had come expecting one outcome and received another, and by several people who simply wanted to look at her more closely now that the room had shifted. He was also aware that her eyes found him across the room multiple times, and that the finding was not accidental. He went to her when the crowd had thinned enough for it not to be a statement, and she looked at him with an expression that was for him alone, open and direct and warm in a way that had nothing to do with the political landscape around them. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "We were effective," she said, with the precision of someone who knew the difference between personal glory and shared work. "That matters more." "Both," he said, "both are true." She was quiet for a moment, and then she did something that surprised the 2 remaining council members who were still within eyeline. She put her hand briefly against the side of his face, One warm touch, public and unhurried, before lowering it. "Yes," she said. "Both." The summit's remaining days were different. Something had broken open in the room, and what poured out was not chaos but clarity. The consortium, its fabrication strategy destroyed and its most visible antagonist discredited, found itself negotiating with less leverage. And Morag, with the moral ground consolidated and Brecht and Ferris as structural allies, was sharper and more direct than she had been before. She came to Samuel's apothecary each evening that week, and the shape of the visits changed from what they had been. She still did her shoulder work, and he still checked her progress, but the pretense of purely professional attendance had given way to something both of them were more honest about now. She would sit at his work table while he worked through his evening compounding, and they would talk. And the talking was the kind that happens between two people who have discovered that the other is more interesting than they had originally calculated, and are now revising their estimates continuously upward. She told him about the upper canyon passes, the way the light fell through the red stone in the early morning, the summer camps where the clan gathered, the traditions of the Stoneback that outsiders rarely heard because few outsiders were trusted enough to hear them. She told him about her path to the chieftainship, which had not been simple or painless, and about the weight of it, which she carried with the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone who had chosen the weight and was not sorry for having chosen it. He told her about the border wars with a directness he had not applied to that period of his life since coming to Redwall. He told her about the particular way it felt to save a life in the field and lose one 30 minutes later, and how those two outcomes did not balance each other in any simple arithmetic. He told her about coming to Redwall with very little and building something here that he was proud of, even if it was small by most measures. He told her that he had been alone for a long time in the way that had nothing to do with the absence of other people, and everything to do with the absence of one in particular. She listened with the same absolute attentiveness she brought to everything, and when he said that last part, she looked up from the herb she was turning in her fingers and held his gaze with a steadiness that felt like an answer. On the 5th evening after the council session, she stayed later than she had before, and when the apothecary's lamp burned down to half, she set aside the document she had been reading and watched him work for a while in a silence that was entirely comfortable, and then she said, "I do not want to go back to the upper canyon when the summit ends." Samuel set down his pestle. He turned on his stool to face her fully. "Tell me what you mean." "I know what I mean," she said. "I am telling you." "Then tell me clearly." She stood up from the work table and crossed to him, which was not a long distance in his small back room, and stood in front of him, close enough that the detail of the bronze lacing on her bodice was very clear, and the warmth of her was something he could feel. "I mean that I have not spent time with someone in years and found myself thinking about them when they are not in the room," she said. "I mean that I find myself listening for your step outside the red house in the evening. I mean that the thought of concluding the summit and returning to the upper canyon and not seeing you again is something I am unexpectedly unwilling to accept." Samuel stood up from his stool, which brought him into the close space of her and required him to look up slightly, and he did it without hesitation or apology. "I have been trying to be careful about this," he said. "I know you have. Because your position here is complicated, and I do not want to be something that complicates it further." "I am aware of my own complications," she said. "I have been a chieftess for 6 years. I am reasonably expert at managing my own complications." Her voice was very low and very warm, and her hands came to rest at his waist in the same deliberate way she had kissed him before, decided and unhurried. "I am asking you, Samuel, if you want this, not what is careful, what you want." The answer was not difficult. It was the answer he had been carrying since the first evening in the red house, since the fire and the tea and the way she had said his name as if she had been weighing it. "I want this," he said. "I want you." She kissed him, and this time there was nothing preliminary about it. It was warm and certain and thorough, and she held him with the full force of hands that could have bent iron, held him with careful gentleness, and he held her back with everything he had, which in this particular currency was considerable. Later, in the lamplight that had burned down to a warm glow, they were quiet in the particular way of people who have said something true and do not feel the need to immediately qualify it. "There are things we need to discuss," Morag said. She was sitting on the work table again, her back against the shelving, and Samuel was standing beside her because standing beside her had become his habitual orientation. "Practical things. I know. My authority as Chieftess is tied to the upper canyon. I cannot simply relocate. I know that too, and your practice is here." Yes, he turned to look at her. "These are not insurmountable problems. They are logistical ones. People have solved harder logistics. There would be costs," she said, "for both of us, politically, socially." "There already are costs," he said. "I lost 2 patients in the last week because their husbands are in Crane's faction and didn't like seeing me at the council session." "Samuel, they were not serious cases," he said, "and they will be back when they need me badly enough. It doesn't change anything." Morag looked at him with that particular expression that was all warmth and no qualification. "You are a remarkable man," she said. "I am a fairly ordinary man who is lucky enough to be in an extraordinary situation," he said. "You are not ordinary." She said it with the flat certainty of someone who has done the accounting. "I have met many ordinary men. You are not one of them." He looked back at her and felt the truth of being seen, the particular warmth of it, and let it settle in him the way good things settle when you stop bracing for them to be taken away. "We should also discuss," he said, "that there is a summit to finish." "There is a summit to finish," she agreed. "And then there is a decision to make." "Tell me what it would take," he said, "practically, for this to work." She thought about it with the same methodical attention she applied to treaty language. "The upper canyon is not empty of settlement. There are trading posts at 2 of the 3 main pass junctions. A physician with my personal appointment could work out of the eastern junction and have access to the lower canyon on rotating schedule. It is not a small life." "I did not come to Redwall for a small life," he said. "I came here to be left alone. The 2 things are different." "No," she said, "they are not the same at all." "And your clan?" he asked. The question had weight, and he offered it with appropriate care. "An alliance with a human physician is one thing. A personal relationship is something else to navigate." "It has been navigated before," she said. "Not often, not without friction, but it is not without precedent in the Stoneback." Her mouth curved. "I am the Chieftess. My personal choices are subject to clan opinion but not to clan veto. That is the difference between a figurehead and an actual authority." "You have thought about this," he said. "I have thought about very little else for the past week," she said, with a directness that made him feel something vivid and luminous. "I am not a woman who performs uncertainty. When I know what I want, I know." He reached out and took her hand, and she turned her palm and held his with a warmth that felt like a promise more binding than any treaty language. "Let's finish the summit," he said, "and then let's talk about the rest." "Yes," she said, "let's." The summit's final week moved with the efficiency of people who had burned through their political posturing and arrived at the actual work. The consortium, recalibrated by the council session's outcome, conceded the primary winter grazing territory in the Redstone Pass and negotiated for 2 of the 3 secondary pass junctions, which was less than they wanted and more than they had any recent moral claim to. In exchange, the Stoneback Confederation agreed to a formal peace boundary, the end of all offensive raiding in the eastern settlement territories, and a joint patrol arrangement at the canyon's eastern edge that gave both sides visibility without requiring trust they did not yet have. It was not a perfect peace. Morag said so herself in plain terms when she and Samuel reviewed the final draft in the Red House on the summit's penultimate night. "It is the beginning of a workable arrangement," she said. "If both sides honor it for 5 years, it can become something lasting. If either side breaks it in the first 2, we are back where we started." "Will the Stoneback honor it?" he asked. "I will make sure of it." There was no doubt in her voice, only the weight of certainty. And the consortium. That is your settlement's problem, she said, and her eyes met his with a warmth that made the word your settlement a more interesting construction than it had been before. On the final evening before the formal signing, Morag came to his apothecary in the dark, not for medicine or consultation or negotiation strategy, but simply because it was where she wanted to be, and Samuel understood this without it needing to be explained. He had a fire going, not large, just enough for light and warmth, and she settled into the chair that had become hers over the past 3 weeks with the ease of someone returning to a familiar place. "How is the shoulder?" he asked. "Much better," she said. "The range is nearly full. Another month and it should be entirely healed. Keep doing the movements." "I will." He brought 2 cups to the table and sat across from her, and the fire was warm and the night outside was the particular quiet of a canyon after wind, and they sat in the comfortable silence of people who had moved past the need to fill silence with performance. "I want to tell you something," she said, after a while. "About the summit's beginning, when I first arrived. I remember the arrival. You met my eyes at the gate," she said. "Everyone else was looking at me the way humans look at orcs, calculating the danger, calculating the politics. You looked at me like you were trying to figure out what kind of person I was." "I was," he said. "That was the first thing," she said. "The first thing that made me pay attention. The first thing for me was when you used the charter process to protect you as a professional courtesy rather than a political calculation," he said. "When you came to me as a patient and not as a chieftess first. That was trust, and you didn't have any obvious reason to offer it." "I read your terms before I arrived," she said. "Your terms protected my welfare over summit politics. Someone who writes that and means it is someone worth trusting. I meant it." "I know you did." She looked at him across the small, fire-warm distance of his worktable. "I came to this summit expecting to fight every inch of ground alone. I have been fighting every inch of ground alone for 6 years. The chieftainship is magnificent and isolating in equal measure." "I know something about useful isolation that turns on you," he said. "Yes," she said. "I think you do." She reached across the table and her fingers touched the back of his hand, tracing the lines of his knuckles with a gentleness that was, coming from her, somehow more significant than force would have been. "I did not expect you." "Neither did I," he said, "any of this." "Are you glad?" He turned his hand and held hers. "More than I know how to say correctly." "Then say it incorrectly," she said, and there was warmth in her voice and the beginning of a smile at the edge of her mouth. "I am completely, unreservedly, inconveniently glad," he said. She laughed, and it was the first time he had heard her laugh fully, without the negotiator's restraint, and it was warm and real, and it filled the small room with something that felt like sunlight had found a way in. He came around the table to her, and she stood to meet him, and the warmth between them was different from the careful, charged tension of the earlier weeks. It was settled, chosen. She held him with the easy certainty of someone who has decided where something belongs and placed it there. And he held her back with everything he had and everything he was. And the canyon outside was very quiet, and the fire was very warm. And neither of them was lonely in the way they had been before. The formal signing took place the next morning in the canyon's open square, which was the logical venue for a settlement of this importance, and the deliberate political theater of witnesses. The council members signed. The consortium representative signed, with a face that suggested he was already planning his next approach in 5 years, which Morag had also calculated for in the treaty language. And Morag signed, her name in both the common tongue and the Stoneback script, with her personal seal pressed into the wax. Governor Carveth made a speech that Samuel largely did not listen to, because he was watching Morag at the signing table and thinking about the next 5 years, which looked, from his current vantage, considerably more interesting than the previous 5. Then came the element he had not been briefed on. When the formal documents were sealed and the official proceedings were complete, Morag rose from the signing table and addressed the assembled witnesses, not with the formal language of treaty closing, but with something different. "I will speak plainly," she said, in the way she always spoke. "The Stoneback have a tradition that any binding agreement witnessed by the clan is also witnessed on the body of the one who makes it. Clan markings are the record of significant commitments." She paused, and her eyes found Samuel in the crowd, direct and warm and unambiguous. "When I ride to the Summit Council at the season's end, where the 7 clan leaders of the Stoneback Confederation will ratify this peace, I will present myself as the signatory and the Stoneback Chieftess who made the agreement." Another pause. "I will present myself without my clan colors." The crowd stirred, a murmur of confusion from those who did not know the significance and a sharper reaction from the 3 Stoneback warriors who did. Drek, Morag's senior guard, drew a quiet breath. "Instead," Morag said, and her voice was very steady, "I will wear the colors of the man who stood beside me in this place and helped me build something worth building." By Stoneback tradition, to wear another's colors at the summit is to name that person as one's equal and one's chosen. It is a declaration that cannot be undone and does not require the clan's approval, only the chieftess's will. The silence of the square was complete. Samuel felt the weight of it settle over him, the public declaration of it, the visible irreversibility of it, and what he felt was not alarm or uncertainty. What he felt was the particular cleanness of something true being named aloud in the sunlight. Morag stepped down from the signing table and crossed the square to him, and the crowd parted before her not because they were afraid, but because the moment had a gravity that commanded space. She stopped in front of him and looked down at him with eyes that were warm and direct and absolutely decided. "If you are willing," she said, quietly enough that it was between them rather than for the crowd. "If you choose this." He looked up at her and at the Stoneback markings on her shoulders and thought about what it would mean to have his colors worn in their place at the Summit Council, where the 7 clan leaders of the Stoneback Confederation would see that their chieftess had chosen a human apothecary from a canyon settlement to stand at her side, and had named it publicly, and had not flinched. "I am willing," he said. "I choose this." Morag reached into the satchel at her side and withdrew a length of deep blue cloth, the blue that Samuel wore in the knotted band at his wrist, the old field surgeon's marker he had carried from the border wars without quite knowing why he still wore it, and she tied it around her own wrist with the precise care of someone who understood the weight of the gesture. The canyon square was very quiet. Then one of the independent council members, Faris, began to clap. It was not the organized applause of a prompted crowd. It was the authentic response of a woman who had watched something real happen and wanted to say so. Breck joined her and 2 of the salt traders, and then a sound rose from the square that was mixed and complicated and genuine, as honest sounds always are. Drek and the other Stoneback warriors made no sound, but after a moment Drek put her fist to her chest, the Stoneback salute, and the others followed. Crane's faction was not present. They had left after the signing. Samuel noted this and did not feel sorry for it. Morag turned her wrist slightly to look at the blue cloth and then looked at Samuel with an expression that was entirely and only for him. "We will need to have the colors properly dyed," she said. "The formal presentation requires a full shoulder marking of the chosen colors." "Tell me what you need," he said. "Your blue," she said, "and your willingness to come to the upper canyon for the summit." "You'll have both," he said. She smiled fully in the public canyon square in the morning light, and it was as deliberate and clear as everything she did. Samuel felt himself smile back with everything he had, and the crowd around them was the whole world briefly made small and manageable by one moment of absolute rightness. The weeks between the treaty signing and the Summit Council gave them time. Time was, Samuel decided, the most underrated gift in the known territories. Morag remained in Redwall longer than was strictly required by treaty protocol, because the implementation of the joint patrol arrangement required physical presence from the Stoneback side, and she chose to manage it personally rather than delegating. Her warriors were amused by this, in the way of people who have observed their commander's strategic flexibility, applied to personal situations as well as military ones, and said nothing that was not supportive. Samuel spent those weeks balancing his practice and the growing pull of a different future. He sold his apothecary lease to his apprentice, a young man named Ferris who had been ready to take it over for a year and had been waiting politely. He kept his supply inventory and his medical kit and his knowledge, none of which required a specific room to remain valuable. He spent an afternoon with Brecht, who gave him survey maps of the Upper Canyon passes and the trade road to the Eastern Junction, and a flask of something strong. "I always thought this canyon was too small for you," Brecht said. "I never said so because you seemed to need the quiet for a while." "I did," Samuel said. "And now?" Samuel thought about dark eyes over a table full of treaty documents, and a deliberate kiss in a lamplit room, and a blue cloth tied around a warrior's wrist in morning light. "Now I'm done being quiet," he said. Morag's preparation for the summit was more complicated. She spent 3 evenings writing to each of the 7 clan leaders. Not a general communication, but individual letters, tailored to each clan head's concerns and temperaments, explaining her intention clearly and leaving no room for it to be construed as weakness or instability. She showed Samuel the drafts, not because she needed his approval, but because sharing the work was something she had found herself wanting to do, and she was a woman who acted on what she found herself wanting. He read them with careful attention and suggested 2 changes, one to the tone of a line that would read as apology to one clan leader who would interpret apology as uncertainty, and one addition to the letter to the most traditional of the 7 clans, acknowledging their custom rather than working around it, which Morag read twice and then amended with. "You have a talent for this," she said. "I was a surgeon during wartime," he said. "Most of diplomacy is knowing which wounds to treat first." She looked at him with that expression that was warm and entirely direct. "I need you to understand something. Tell me. When we arrive at the summit, you will be standing beside the Stoneback Chieftess wearing your colors publicly in front of the 7 clan heads. There will be those who see you as a political move. There will be those who see you as a weakness. There will be those who will test you. I know. I will defend you," she said. "That is not in question, but I need to know that you are walking into that without rose-colored assumptions about how it will feel." Samuel set down the letter he was holding. "Morag. I stitched men together in the dark during a 3-year war and then came alone to a canyon settlement and built a practice from nothing while half the town viewed me with varying degrees of suspicion. I have some experience with rooms where I am not entirely welcome." She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said, "you do." "I am not walking into the summit thinking it will be easy," he said. "I'm walking into it because the alternative is not walking into it, and you are not an alternative I am prepared to accept." Morag crossed to him in the Red House's main room, which had ceased to feel like a formal diplomatic residence sometime around the 3rd week, and had become simply a place they spent time together, and she held his face in her hands with the practiced tenderness that was somehow more disarming to him than her full physical authority, and kissed him with a thoroughness that made the canyon outside irrelevant. "Good," she said when she drew back. "Then we understand each other." "We understand each other," he agreed, smiling. The preparation for the physical presentation was a matter that fell to both of them together, and was, unexpectedly, one of the warmest and most particular days Samuel could remember. The tradition of the Stoneback color naming required a cloth prepared by the one being claimed for, worked with whatever pattern the named person's heritage or trade warranted, in their colors, and presented by the Chieftess as part of her formal appearance at the summit. Morag had never done this. The chieftainship had come to her at 22, in the aftermath of her predecessor's death and the subsequent necessary decisions, and there had been no one she had wanted to name in the years since. She sat with him and described what the pattern needed to contain, and Samuel found a cloth worker in the canyon's west quarter, a woman who did banners and formal guild work, and they spent a morning explaining what was needed. The blue was Samuel's blue, the particular medium-deep color he had always worn, and the pattern, they decided together, would incorporate the careful knot of the surgeon's band alongside the geometric foundation of Stoneback styling. Watching the cloth worker lay out the first preliminary design, with Morag sitting beside him translating what was right and what needed adjustment, and both of them bending over the table to look at the same point, their shoulders touching, Samuel thought that this was what it felt like to build something with another person rather than simply enduring alongside them. When the cloth came back 3 days later, finished and pressed, and more beautiful than either of them had expected, Morag held it for a moment with an expression Samuel had not seen on her before. Something quiet and soft around the edges, unguarded in the way of someone who did not often allow themselves to want something, and was discovering the particular weight of having gotten it. He put his arm around her shoulders gently, and she leaned into him, which for a woman who kept her posture as immaculate as a point of policy was a significant and deliberate act of trust. They stood like that for a while in the canyon light with the cloth in her hands. "Thank you," she said, very quietly. "For what?" "For being willing," she said. "For not being afraid of what this is." "Morag." He said her name the way she had taught him to say it, with the weight on the first syllable. "I have been afraid of many things in my life. You are not one of them. Being without you is." She was quiet for a moment, and then she turned her head and looked at him from very close, and her expression was everything she was, strong and warm and real and decided and entirely his. "Then let us make sure neither of us is without the other," she said. "Agreed," he said. The ride to the summit council took 4 days up through the canyon passes, and Samuel made it on a gray horse that the Stoneback warriors privately found amusing, but were too polite to say so. The passes were as Morag had described them, red stone rising on either side, the particular light of the canyon country at altitude, the smell of sage and hot rock, and the thin, clear air of elevation. He made a point of not looking like a man who had never ridden for 4 consecutive days, which required more effort than he would have admitted. Morag rode beside him for most of it, rather than at the head of the party where a chieftess might be expected, and they talked with the ease of people who had moved past formality entirely and were enjoying what was on the other side. She pointed out plants and rock formations with the proprietary pleasure of someone showing a known and loved place to someone they wanted to love it too. He asked questions and meant them, and felt the high country enter him the way new places do when you arrive open rather than defended. On the 3rd night, camped at the eastern junction with a fire going and the stars extremely close in the way of high elevation, Morag lay beside him in the warmth of the fire and the shared blankets, her dark hair loose from its braids, looking more relaxed than he had seen her, and said, "Tell me about before the war." So he did. He told her about growing up in a river town, the youngest son of a cloth merchant who had too many children and not enough work, learning to compound medicines from an elderly apothecary who had taken him on out of charity and found in him an unexpected aptitude. He told her about the particular loneliness of being the kind of person who sees things clearly and is surrounded by people who prefer not to see clearly, and how that had made him useful in the war and something of an outsider after it. She listened with the full quality of her attention and then said, "That is not loneliness peculiar to humans." "No," he said. "I know. I think it's just the tax for paying attention." She rolled toward him and put her head against his shoulder with the easy rightness of something that had found its place, and her hand was warm over his heart, and the stars above the canyon country were very bright and very close, and the fire was warm. "When we go back," she said, "when the summit is done and the ratification is settled, I want to show you the summer camp, the full territory." "I'd like that," he said. "The clan will need time with you," she said. "Time to see you as you are rather than what they expect you to be." "I have patience," he said. "I know you do." She pressed her hand slightly against his chest over his heart. "It is one of the things I rely on. I'm glad it's useful." "It is not only useful," she said, soft and direct. "It is beloved." He covered her hand with his and felt the canyon country around them and the weight of what was coming and the warmth of what was already here, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the most he had felt in years. The Summit Council of the Stoneback Confederation met in the High Canyon, at the junction of the three principal passes, in a clearing that had been used for clan gathering for longer than the settlement records of Redwall had been kept. 7 pavilion structures were erected around the central meeting ground, one for each clan, and the gathering involved perhaps 200 people in total, which felt both intimate and enormous in the close canyon walls. Samuel was aware of being looked at from the moment they rode into the gathering ground. Not all the attention was hostile. Much of it was simply measuring, the assessment of a people who had reason to be careful about what they admitted into their circle. He met it directly and steadily and let himself be looked at, which was the only honest response. He was wearing his blue, the same color as the cloth Morag would present. He had put on his best work clothes, which in this context felt slightly inadequate but were genuinely the best he had, and he had left his surgeon's kit at his side because it was part of who he was, and pretending otherwise would have been a performance neither of them wanted. The formal presentation of the treaty and its signatory was the first morning's principal business. Morag stood at the center of the gathering ground, and the 7 clan heads formed a half-circle before her, and the assembled Stoneback behind them, and Samuel stood to one side with Drek and the other warriors. He could see every face in the gathering with the clarity of someone who was very aware that this was the moment. She wore no clan colors. This was the first thing that the gathering registered, the absence of the Stoneback markings that were as much a part of Morag Earthshaker's public appearance as her face or her bearing. The murmur that went through the crowd was not disorganized. It was the sound of people recognizing the significance of a tradition being invoked. She wore the blue. His blue worked into the shoulder epaulets of the fitted leather bodice she always wore, the pattern the cloth worker had made with their combined input. The Stoneback geometry married to the surgeon's not in the deep, clear color that was his. She wore it with the same absolute ease with which she wore everything, as if she had decided it and the world was now expected to accommodate the decision. She presented the treaty first. She spoke about what had been built at Redwall, the terms, the process, the cost, and the value, with the measured authority of a woman who had negotiated every line of it personally, and was accountable for every word. 3 of the 7 clan heads had questions. She answered each one precisely. And then she spoke about the color naming. She said it in the Stoneback dialect, which Samuel followed only partially, but the words that came through clearly because they were said in the common tongue for the explicit inclusion of their subject, were these. He stood beside me when it was inconvenient to stand. He used what he had to protect what was right, not because he was asked to, and not because it was easy, but because it was true. That is the only credential the tradition requires. The eldest of the 7 clan heads, a woman of perhaps 60 with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen considerably more than Samuel's 31 years, looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Morag. "The tradition is yours to invoke," the elder said. "The clan's witness is given." The formal response from the gathering was not uniform, but it was, taken as a whole, the sound of acceptance more than opposition, and the opposition that was present was civil in the way of a tradition that expected its customs to be used honestly rather than politically. If the Chieftess named someone with the full weight of the weight of the tradition also obligated the clan to receive the named. Afterward, in the early afternoon, the eldest clan head made her way to Samuel without ceremony and looked at him with the direct measure of someone who was not concerned with his comfort. "What do you know about the Stoneback?" she asked. "Some," he said honestly. "Not enough yet." "What do you intend to learn?" "Everything she will teach me," he said. "And anything the clan is willing to add." The elder made a sound that might have been approval or might have been the preliminary to a much longer response, and then said, "She has been alone too long. Any fool could see it." She looked at his blue on Morag's shoulders. "You had better be worth the color." "I intend to be," he said. The elder turned and went back to her pavilion, which was apparently all the verdict she was prepared to offer that afternoon. Samuel thought that, on a scale of possible outcomes, it was considerably above the worst and possibly in the territory of the best. Morag appeared at his side a moment later, and her expression carried the particular satisfaction of someone who has run a complex operation and watched each element land where it was intended. "The eldest told you something," she said. "She told me I had better be worth the color. And I told her I intended to be." "Good answer." Morag turned to face him, and in the open air of the summit ground, with the canyon walls rising around them and 200 Stoneback as witnesses, she took both his hands in hers and held them with the warm, solid certainty that was the most characteristically her thing she did. "It is done," she said. "The treaty is ratified. The color naming is witnessed." "It's done," he agreed. "Are you frightened?" He thought about it. "Not even slightly," he said. She smiled, full and unguarded and real, and it was the most beautiful thing in the canyon. "Good," she said. "Neither am I. The agreement they worked out was, like the treaty, practical and built on the honest acknowledgement of what each of them needed." Samuel would establish his primary practice at the eastern junction of the Upper Canyon passes, where there was a trading post with a stone building that would serve as a combination apothecary and surgery. The eastern junction sat at the crossroads of the Stoneback Summer Territory, three of the small human settlements that had been part of the peace treaty's eastern farm protections, and the trade road that ran from the canyon to the lower settlements. It was, in fact, a better location for a physician than Redwall had ever been, with a wider range of patients and more genuine need. The consortium representative in Redwall would remain aware that Morag's personal physician was an independent entity with charter citizen status, which was a small structural protection but a real one. Morag's formal residence was the chief's pavilion at the high summer camp, which was not a permanent structure, but the tradition was clear that the chieftess had a home there. She also used the Red House in Redwall during negotiation seasons, and this, too, remained. The movement between places was not a liability. It was simply the shape of a life that had more territory than a single canyon settlement. They rode back down from the summit council together in the late afternoon of the second day, ahead of the larger party, which Drek managed without comment, and with what Samuel had come to recognize as her characteristic dry approval. The canyon light was extraordinary in the late afternoon, the red stone going gold and deep amber, the shadows long and cool. "I need to ask you something," Samuel said, when they were in the easy middle distance of a canyon pass with the summit behind them and the eastern junction visible in the far valley ahead. "Ask," Morag said. "The Stoneback tradition around the color naming," he said. "Is there a corresponding element from the named person's side? Something I should do or observe or offer?" She looked at him, and in the particular quality of the light his face was clear and open to her, and she said, "A named person may offer their own marker. It is not required. It is a choice." He reached into his coat and removed the blue cord he wore at his wrist, the field surgeon's band he had worn for 8 years, and he held it for a moment. Then he tied it around her wrist, below the cloth strip she still wore from the canyon square, and it sat there against her green skin in the same gold light, simple and exact. "I offer this," he said. "Not required. Chosen." Morag looked at the cord on her wrist for a long moment, and then looked at him with an expression that was entirely and only real, and said nothing for a moment because some things are larger than the words that follow them immediately. "Chosen," she said finally, and the word had all the weight of every deliberate thing she had ever done. They rode on together down the canyon road in the long afternoon light, the settlement ahead and the high passes behind, and the territory between was theirs, not by conquest or treaty or politics, but by the simple and sufficient fact that they had both chosen it. At the eastern junction, the trading post stone building had a light burning in the window that Ferris had arranged, per Samuel's letter, as a formal indicator of the new practice's opening. The sign above the door read Maddox, Apothecary and Surgery, Eastern Junction, which was straightforward and without pretense and exactly right. Morag looked at it as they dismounted and said, "It needs the Stoneback mark beside it, for the clan patients who come down from the passes." "Then we'll add it," he said. "I will carve it," she said. "It should be my hand." "Then carve it," he said. She turned to look at the stone building, at the light in the window and the sign and the solid, promising reality of it, and then turned to look at Samuel, and the expression on her face was something he had been learning the vocabulary of over weeks and was still discovering new words for. This one, he thought, was something in the territory of home. "You asked me weeks ago," he said, "why I was willing to take this position at the summit. You said it was your job. That was part of it," he said. "The rest of it I couldn't have told you then because I didn't know it yet. What is the rest of it?" He looked at her in the evening light of the eastern junction, with the canyon country rising around them and the trading post's warm light, and the blue cord on her wrist and his colors on her shoulders, and said, "The rest of it is that I was very tired of living in a small and careful way. I had made myself small because it felt like the right response to the world. And then you arrived, and I watched you hold the entire weight of 3 generations of conflict and not crack under it, and not pretend it was simple, and not settle for less than what you came for." He paused. "You reminded me that I don't have to be small." Morag stepped toward him in the exact deliberate way she did everything, closed the remaining distance, and held his face in her hands, which were warm and strong and familiar, and looked at him with the full, undivided attention that was one of the most powerful things he had ever been on the receiving end of. "You were never small," she said. "You were careful. Those are not the same thing." "No," he said, "they're not." She kissed him, there in the open air of the eastern junction with the canyon walls and the evening sky and the new sign above the door. And it was the kind of kiss that is also a declaration, unhurried and certain and final in the best sense, the sense of a thing that has arrived where it was going. When she drew back, she kept her forehead against his for a moment, her hand still at his face, and then she straightened and turned to look at the stone building beside them, and something in the way she stood was different, relaxed in a way he had not seen her stand in a public setting before, as if she had finally arrived somewhere she had been traveling toward without knowing the destination. "Let us go inside," she said. "I want to see where you will work." He opened the door and the warm light came out, and they went in together. Behind them, in the evening canyon, Drek and the other warriors made camp with the efficient quiet of people who had followed their chieftess through many things, and were settled in the understanding that this was the best ending any of those things had come to. The sign above the door of the apothecary caught the last of the light as the canyon went to dusk, and beside it, in the space that was waiting for the chieftess's mark, the stone was smooth and ready, and the evening star appeared above the red canyon walls, bright and precise and absolutely certain.